The question right now has to be, how do you beat India? Every single team in this World Cup has already asked that, and they've come up with nothing. A giant donut. India are at home, in form, and they have an incredible bowling lineup. They barely noticed the loss of one of the world's most useful all-rounders, Hardik Pandya. They started this tournament with a non-playing all-rounder in Shardul Thakur. So how do you beat them? New Zealand's plan was new ball wickets. There are still little chunks of New Zealand new ball bowlers all over Wankhede. After choosing their opening bowlers very carefully, New Zealand made 3 more changes in the power play. That's like setting fire to your plan. But New Zealand didn't start the fire, Rohit Sharma did. But why did New Zealand need so many early wickets? Because India's biggest weakness is the number 8 spot. And it's a bit like knowing there is a cure for cancer on Jupiter. The problem is, how do you get there? Because the only way to beat India right now is to dismiss 5 guys who all pretty much average 50 or higher in one-day international cricket. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. This show was made by HCLTech, a company that believes in partnerships so much you can read their name on the Australian shirt. This show leans in hard on data and technology, so we are proud to work with HCLTech, leaders in their field. And if you think that was all hyperbole and for clicks, well, you're wrong. Because the reason I came upon this stat was really quite random. The other day I was looking at the highest averages in ODI cricket to see where Rassie van der Dussen was. And I noticed that 5 of the top 15 batting averages in the history of our game are in this Indian side. Outside of South Africa for a few years, and there have been other teams with multiple players at the top end of this list. South Africa had AB de Villiers and Hashim Amla together at the same time. And even India once had Dhoni, Kohli, Rahul and Sharma all together. Although at that point they wouldn't have all been top 15, KL definitely wasn't. And so then I thought, well, has this ever happened before? The Australian team of 2007 had Mike Hussey and Michael Clarke with Matt Hayden and Ricky Ponting in the top 15. But even then, Hayden and Ponting were at the back end of that list. And that's it. That's as close as anyone has ever come. This is unprecedented. And you could actually make it more so if you wanted to, by saying that only 11 players have ever averaged 50 in one-day internationals, and 4 of them are playing for India right now. There is no doubt that in the last 6 years, the best players have started averaging a lot more. Until 2004, Michael Bevan was the only player to average 50 in one-day internationals. 10 more have been added to that list since. But it gets more fun, because Rohit Sharma is not one of the 4 players to average 50 in this team. Somehow he just manages to keep his mark a tick under the magic number. But it would be hard to argue that Rohit is a top-tier ODI batter. But more importantly, he's probably never been better than he is right now. Even as good as he was in those days when he scored 200 all the times, he seems better now. This is the version of Rohit Sharma that had Viv Richards raving about him almost 15 years ago. And you look at the best power plays ever in a World Cup, and you put him in the company of Matt Hayden, who's actually on this list, but he shouldn't be, as in 2000 he wasn't actually dismissed at all. And also Brendan McCullum, who managed to score at 2 runs a ball and make the second most runs ever in power plays back in 2015. Rohit is kind of halfway between both of them, scoring with the second highest strike rate ever, the 3rd highest average, and the most runs. This has allowed India to blow teams' new ball bowlers completely away, meaning that the rest of the batting only really has to work on autopilot. But he has not done it alone, because look at Shubman Gill over here. This is a man who had dengue fever at the start of this World Cup. Now the only people with a fever, throbbing joints, severe headaches, pain behind the eyes, swollen glands and vomiting, as it currently stands, he is the only man in the history of ODIs with an average over 60. Will it come down? I mean, probably. But he's kept this mark here for over 2,000 runs while scoring at better than a run a ball. And he is not the only younger player doing well for India. I made an entire video about how the fact that people think India doesn't bat very well at number 4 and how it isn't true. And I knew that because I knew Shreyas Iyer was going to play for them. Could his batting use more rounding? Absolutely. But he is a fantastic member of this team, largely because of how well he plays spin. And how good is he? Well, he's averaging 94 against spin since he walked into ODI cricket in December of 2017. Yeah, drink that in. And want me to add some spice to that number? The average is great, but he is doing it at better than a run a ball. Along with Glenn Maxwell, his numbers do not make any sense. And so I thought, why don't I just check him against the entire database of the last 20 years? He is the only player averaging more than 55 at better than a run a ball. And of course, he also has the best average. This has just never happened before. And we could talk about him in the short ball all day long, but we have to also look at the other side here. It's all well and good pointing out the negative, But sometimes you've got to hang a lampshade on the positive. And on that note, shall we talk about the best whipping boy in professional sports? KL Rahul. When I made a piece about KL's record at the start of this World Cup and how well he actually does under pressure and against good teams, one person was so angry. He commented, he emailed, I think he might have found me on the street to tell me that KL was not consistent. The same KL Rahul who currently averages 50 in ODIs. How do you do that for over 2,000 ODI runs without being consistent? Essentially, KL is the worst of the top 5, which basically makes him Ringo Starr. And sure, everyone wants to be John or George, but only Ringo got to voice Thomas the Tank Engine. KL is not better than anyone in that top 4, but he can back up every single one of them. He is the world's most overpaid understudy. And he can also bat at 5, meaning that he can fill in more roles in this team than any of those other guys. If they lose 3 early wickets, he can be the opener, like against Australia. If they all make a ton of runs early on, he can come in later and score quickly. To have a player like this and not appreciate it is when you know as a fan base you are spoiled. The first weakness in their batting is Sky at number 6. However, because of how many runs the rest of them are making, he's no longer actually playing ODI cricket, but actually batting in T20. And he loves those. His ability to be a microwave scorer with 3 anchor-like guys ahead of him is absolutely perfect. And then you have the number 7, who was in a form slump, but is still one of the best number 7s in the history of ODI cricket. And yes, he could bat faster at times. But being that he is a frontline bowler and also a top 5, at least, number 7, it's like complaining that you only won $1 million in the lotto. So, and it is true that Mohammad Shami is one of the worst number 8s in this World Cup. Actually, let's be honest, he is probably the worst. But the question is, how do you even get to him? Oh, and I forgot someone, didn't I? Yeah, at number 2 on the all-time batting averages list, with more than 10,000 runs and nearly an average of 60, is a guy called Virat Kohli. And here's another fun stat on him that you definitely wouldn't have heard recently. He now has the most hundreds in ODI cricket history. That is pretty good. In fact, he is a good player. Good. So to get through to Shami's shitty batting, all you need to do is get past the opener who's made, quite a few double hundreds in ODI cricket, or the other opener who has the highest batting average in the history of the game, or the guy who's made the most one-day hundreds ever, or the guy who has the highest average against spin ever, not to forget India's Ringo Starr, a T20 enforcer, and one of the greatest number 7s ever. This is all the career batting averages of the current Indian 11. Clearly the runs drop off around the number 6 and number 7 mark, and then disappear entirely once you get to number 8. But I thought it was worth looking at how many runs the top 7 would make if they all just batted to their averages. And the answer to that is, if their top 7 alone made their career marks, India would make 330 runs. This is a site that looks at the entire history of cricket, tries to put in context all the time, and looks beyond recency bias. But at a certain point, you have to admit that this Indian bowling lineup doesn't really have any flaws and takes wickets all the time, and it still may not be their strength. You look at everything I've just shown you and you have to ask, how the hell do you beat India?